We come full circle to this idea of austerity and how, you constantly hear people that are not even dumb. I wouldn't necessarily even say that they're dumb. I would just say that they're exceptionally misinformed, maybe on purpose. But this whole idea of we're $37 trillion in debt, this country's going to break in about 5 minutes. What the hell are we going to do about this? Now, for those of you who are familiar, we are very selective in the type of content that we like to share on our channel. We don't just put anybody out there. I have been following Moon's content for quite some time. I think he does a pretty decent job. The Brit has some snark and some, I would say, fairly accurate takes on a number of things, but then he doesn't have as accurate a take on everything. And this is a subject matter that is very near and dear to Steve's heart. So we're going to share with you exactly what the truth is regarding this concept of austerity, as well as this idea that the dollar is built on a lie. So Steve, we're going to start it. We're going to stop it. We're going to have a little fun here. And we're going to enjoy your wisdom on this subject matter.
24 alone, billionaire wealth has surged by $2 trillion. We're going into an age of trillionaires. And since the top 1% have taken nearly 40% of all the wealth in the US, the result is leading to rampant inequality. And with rising debt and a coming economic downturn, this could end up.
Why do they insist on saying that the United States is 36 trillion in debt? And what are they hoping to accomplish by doing it this way?
Well, a couple things, right? Number one, the libertarian mind wants to end the government's ability to have a public anything. They don't like the fact that the government is the currency issuer. They don't like the fact that the government gets to pick and choose what it invests in, who gets money, etc. They don't like that. And so they've, forever have tried to make banks the bigger deal, but more in charge, more involved. So they hype up this concept that the government is 36 trillion in debt. And all that $36 trillion is, if you're a child that understands basic accounting, a child, not an adult, not a college graduate, a child, you understand that there is an asset and a liability on every balance sheet, period. You know that one person's spending is another person's income. And in the government's case, it spends money into existence. So on your balance sheet, when it spends money into existence, it registers what? A liability. Over here, on the other side, is us. Well, not necessarily us. Probably BlackRock, Boeing, Halliburton, any number of huge companies that are on the Tesla, SpaceX, all these different groups get huge public subsidies. And they're not taxpayer dollars. I'm sorry, folks, your taxes didn't do this, but it is our asset on the other side of the ledger. The government is the creator of the currency. We are the users of the currency. The government needs to provision itself. It spends money into existence, liabilities and assets. So we have gotten ourselves in our head. Okay, yes, but government has to pay interest on that debt. It creates the money that it pays the interest on that debt. That's it. That's it. It's that simple. It's another way of bypassing laws, because usually money is spent into existence when government creates laws. But what does it do? It creates interest rates. Why? Because it wants to protect a positive interest rate. Why? Because it sells bonds. Why? Because people want a safe investment. Government checks don't bounce. Okay? So the interest payments are new money as well. It's not your tax dollars. Sorry, not your tax dollars. The taxes do you have a totally different loop over here. Taxes purge reserves. So when you pay a tax, remember, government has its debt. We have our asset. That debt over here creates a reserve in the banking system, because money that you think you see isn't real money. What money is, high-powered money, is what's going on inside of the banking system, okay? So when you pay a tax, it comes back like the dark and light crystal. That reserve in the banking system is wiped out. It's no longer. It's deleted. It's gone. Nobody made that money. Nobody earned that money, right? What they did, banks do, is they earn that interest, and it's a policy decision. It is 100% a policy decision that they earn interest on. I don't think we pay interest on reserves anymore. I think it was like 2010 sometime we stopped doing it. But the point is that they have chosen to sell bonds. And what are bonds? You can only buy a bond in the United States with a US dollar. You can't buy bonds with foreign currency. You can only buy it with US dollars. And when you buy your bond, okay, that interest is they already know what the terms of your bond are. They already know what it is. And it is just as fungible as money. You're taking yellow dollars because what you've done is you created a box with your existing dollars in it that creates interest. That's it. And that's why you see all the interest portfolio, or the investment portfolios have a certain level of bond purchases to hedge against ebbs and flows in the stock market because it's volatile. But bonds are never that. Bonds, yes, and that is a great, great, great quote right there. If we understood how the monetary system worked for real, we would really lose our shit over how they lie to us about not having money to take care of student debt. Why do we even have student debt? That we would lose our minds that we don't have health care. But instead, a lot of shitheads run around telling everyone, hey, fucking debt, man. We can't spend that money. Government's out of control, man. Dude, cool dude. We're spending so much money. It's out of control. And those fuckwits are playing the master's hand to create austerity out of stupidity, out of moronicness, out of ignorance, out of propaganda, whatever it is. At the end of the day, what they're doing is the bidding for the bad guys. And you call them whatever you want. They call him Igor. I don't care. Yes, master. Yes, right? Now, what the ticket example? Okay, so you go and you buy a ticket to a concert, right? Ticket costs you, I don't know, $100. You go to the concert. What you're doing, you care about is the concert. The ticket's worthless. You go to a Broadway play and you give the jacket guy your coat. He gives you a ticket. You come back, you hand him your ticket, you get your coat. You go to the valet. You say, hey, park my car. You pay them $20. They give you a ticket. Hey, it's the same thing as money. It's just like a stamp. It's all the same thing. It's not a big fucking deal. What it is a credit relationship. Right now, they have a liability. You have an asset. It's it. It's not a big deal, but we make it a big deal. And it's a particularly dumb deal because the government, I like this Sbarro's analogy, right? So I used to be a general manager of Sbarro's, the Italian eatery, and a pizza maker and all the others. Yeah, the pizza pies. Yeah. and the Lasantis, you know? Anyway, we would sit there and we would hand out 50-cent coupons to everybody. I would stand on the corner handing out 50-cent coupons with a big, huge poster board turned into a big funnel on my head to look like a stupid hat that would draw attention to me. But I would give them 50-cent coupons. And guess what? Every one of those people in the line out there coming into the mall would come into my store with their 50-cent coupon I had just handed them and get 50% off or 50 cents off on a pizza. And I didn't give a rat's ass. You know what I did with those coupons? I fucking threw them in the trash. We didn't fund ourselves with 50-cent coupons. The government doesn't fund itself with dollars. It doesn't need dollars. It needs you to need dollars. So it imposes a tax payable only in dollars. So you need to do it. So you got to do something for it, right? And so this whole idea of 36 trillion in debt fucking hurts like a mofo, right? It's like, oh my God, I got to pay my interest payments on my credit cards, and I got to pay my mortgage, and I got to pay my car payment, got to pay insurance, and oh my God, food's gone up. That's scary as fuck for regular people, but we're currency users. The currency issuer laughs and says, there's nothing that we can't afford that's payable in US dollars. And guess what? Before some snapperhead says, well, what if they lose faith in the dollar, man? Right? The fact is they use a tax. That tax keeps you needing the dollar. And you know what happens if you don't pay your taxes? Let me introduce you to the IRS. Let me introduce you to the court system. Let me introduce you to homelessness and vehiclelessness and literally garnishment of your wages. If you think taxes are a funding operation, you've lost the plot. Taxes are a coercive relationship with your government. It's not that the government's doing something nefarious. It is, by the way, doing something nefarious, but a fiat currency in general requires us to need its currency. So imposing any level of taxation is a means of maintaining the priming of the pump and the loop that creates an economy. Now, if we were socialists and we were in control of things, you would have all your needs met. Why? Because me as the government, I would pay doctors directly and say, make sure you give them care. And here's the standard to receive payment. Here's the standard. It's total help. They don't have to pay a nickel at the point of service. You need a house, no problem. We will make sure everyone has a house. And why do people rob and steal? Because they're desperate as fuck. Not because they're black or brown or poor. They're poor because of the fucking system. Because you thought the government was drowning in 36 trillion in debt and you wanted to cut spending. Okay? Oh, and then the worst part, and this is the sickest part. Libertarian ideology says that whenever the government spends, it's inflationary because it's increasing the money supply. They don't realize that we're not on a commodity money. They don't realize that we are on a free-floating fiat currency. And they don't realize that interest payable to banks is a policy choice. We could end the Fed tomorrow to make every freaking chucklehead that doesn't know what the Fed does happy. And then you would say that the Rothschilds took over the Treasury. Okay? It doesn't fucking matter. It's just a credit relationship. And so this idea of 36 trillion in debt is a means of control, because you notice that that term 36 trillion in debt never once comes up when we just freaking funnel all the goods and services to Israel, when we funnel all the goods and services to Ukraine, when we funnel all these things. We don't sit there and go, how are we doing it? Because you know what the government is doing? It's not sending money to Israel. What it's doing is it's sending money to weapons manufacturers to create jobs in the U.S., who then in turn, based on the contract, send that goods and services to Israel. Hey, you need 50 planes? No problem. We'll make you 50 planes. It's going to be $10 billion or whatever. Okay, there you go. At the end of the day, this is the problem. We really believe that the currency issuing government is borrowing money from China. We're borrowing money from China. And China, we're going to go to war with you, but we're borrowing money from you to fund our war against you. It makes so much fucking sense that every fucking knucklehead believes it. And after a while, you start scratching your head going,
maybe this isn't how it really is supposed to be.
Maybe not. Maybe not so much, right? After a bit, but it takes a bit. Let's watch this film, man.
Being a recipe for chaos, and one thing buried underground may be the root of all of this, and that is oil. To put everything into perspective, the US is sitting on an estimated 264 billion barrels of untapped thin oil. There's over 60 billion barrels under Texas alone, which is weird considering the fact that the US has been hit hard by oil and fuel shortages time and time again. It's given OPEC tons of power to exploit the US, and what's more is that this US thin oil is actually better oil overall than most other oil that's being imported.
You know, I just had a thought about, speaking of Spaceballs, you know, that conversation was like 10,000 years of fresh air. The way he runs things, it won't last 100. So I'm thinking, okay, so we got all this oil underneath our soil. Do you, knowing our country, do you know how fast we would burn through it? No pun intended. All of that fucking shit. It's
just remember, this is the most important thing about this. First of all, it gets into this funny logic, and I can't wait to bust it out in a minute. But you know, the U.S., these are assets. These are real resources, right? And people that are stupid and follow the Trump method, who are listening to this whole thing about tariffs and we're going to bring the jobs home. And don't get me wrong, it'd be great if we had jobs here, but he ain't bringing them home that way. That ain't how it works, okay? If you think about the fact that we are literally taking their oil for our dollars and keep maintaining our oil while we do that. if you don't see the genius, evil genius, but genius in that, I'm sorry to tell you that there's genius in that. But because people don't understand the relationship between imports and exports, because people take their political economy before they think about the base case of government printing money. I hate that term, but I'll use it just for this purpose. Printing money to buy oil. Okay. Here's my piece of paper that I create freely. Oh, by the way, give me that oil that you slaved over to get out of the ground. You know what I mean? That is the ultimate coup around the world. That is empire but has nothing to do with the quote unquote petrodollar, which he's going to get into in a minute. And I want to preempt it a little bit, right? The petrodollar is nothing more than what we call a numeraire. It's not a real thing. Anybody can trade their currency in for whatever. Now, mind you, in the rest of the world, because they are not the preeminent reserve currency, there's a lot of reserve currencies. Let's not pretend not, because the UK, the pound is a reserve currency. Japan's yen is a reserve currency. The Australian dollar is a reserve currency. The euro is a reserve currency. And quite frankly, China purposely doesn't do some of the things that would make it very, very viable. This is part of the reason why the BRICS will have more of a challenge to unseat the dollar. And it won't change really a whole lot of anything. The difference will be, instead of having the privilege of being able to deal directly using dollars to handle international transactions, we'll have to be like a good, normal community member and have to trade our dollars, change our dollars from dollars to whatever we're trading in that moment. And it really is such an irrelevant nothing burger in the end. It does, though, provide us with the makings of empire. And you can see this through the use of the IMF, giving loans in US dollars. Think about this. If you are Venezuela or Argentina or you come up with Argentina, Chile, some African nation that is down in its luck and needing foreign goods and services, US government through the IMF is here to provide you a loan from the IMF, payable with all these terms like structural adjustments, where you got to eliminate any barriers to entry and allow my corporations to come in and literally harvest the things, your real wealth, the things in the ground, steal that from you so you can pay your foreign dollar denominated debt. And that right there is the real name of empire, if you really begin to understand the way empire works. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in, because they're going to go into this and it's going to make me, like, my eyes are going to roll back into my head.
Hold on,
so go ahead.
It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it's easier to refine, and it's actually better for the environment. Even with all of this, you would think that just one major shortage or one big scare would be enough to start the process of switching things over, especially when this could end up being more profitable for the US in the long run anyway. This affects every single person living in America, but because it's not being used, it's making everyone poorer in ways that most can't even comprehend. And the truth of this has been covered up for decades. The cause of our problems today comes from how the US reacted to the crisis, and it all links back to how Washington and the financial apparatus took advantage of the crisis, not the crisis itself. Now, Richard Nixon, for all of his faults, did actually have a plan to prevent all of this from happening again. He knew that the pressure building up in the Middle East was going to explode, and he also knew that this wasn't a problem that would go away anytime soon. One more problem with access to the oil supply, and the US would be plunged yet again into another crisis. So his solution was pretty simple: invest in nuclear energy. Ever since the Manhattan Project, the US has led the world in nuclear technology. It was the only truly viable alternative to fossil fuels and oil. He knew the petroleum industry wasn't going to reset their infrastructure for American light oil either. However much money they made, they'd never pay the bill to restructure everything, and their power within the government was far too great to force them into it. So he tried to bypass them. In a speech following the crisis, he announced Project Independence, a plan to build nuclear power plants across the country. This nearly limitless source of clean energy would have given the US everything it needed to finally wean itself off of liquid gold. But as we know now, it never came to fruition. Nixon's plan was ambitious, but it lasted about as long as he did. A year later, the brewing Watergate crisis pushed him out of office. The US government was then left in shambles with seemingly nobody at the helm. That was except for one man who would decide the fate of the world's future, Henry Kissinger. He had a different plan to secure America's future, and it wasn't based on nuclear energy. Instead, he was going to work with Wall Street to secure America's dominance over the world, and he was going to use oil to do it.
As if that man couldn't die 1,000 deaths any harder than he already has. To think that a man as evil as that when it comes to Laos and Cambodia, but then you think about how he really changed the financial infrastructure of the United States. This is one evil son of a bitch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to simp for nuclear energy. I have a lot of very, very valid physics-based pushback on that, but that's not really the point.
I support nuclear.
My problem comes down to talking with physicists and understanding the waste that comes from this. And there's certain things that just can't be undone, right? That's part of the problem. You have an earthquake, you have a Chernobyl moment. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that goes into this, but even on a more day-to-day kind of thing, there's other issues there. And again, I'm not going to go down the nuclear path right now. I want to stick with the economic one and kind of focus on the oil problem, right? What they're trying to say is the U.S. has this sweet crude and that the rest of the world has this sour, kind of chunky, gross crude, right? Like sour crude. And so our facilities, our refineries are built to manage that. And that is true to a large degree. That is true. What is not true is that it would cost us billions. Yes, it would cost the federal government if it decided that energy policy was part of its charter to make an energy policy and pass a law that said we are going to retrofit these refineries to handle sweet crude, or we're going to go ahead and shift completely to renewables in some way, shape, or form. It could literally fund every retrofitting of a smokestack in America. It could literally afford to make sure that every human being had access to high-speed rail or planned communities. It could do any of these things. It's not going to do that. Why? Because they want to extract private wealth from the system. And the only way to do that is to take what's available in the private sector until that's all saturated, and then eliminate other public spaces. This is why they want to eliminate, public housing and public support for, you name it, the entire public aspects of schooling, of education, of roads, you name it. I mean, it's all being privatized in the name of private absolute capital accumulation and finance capitalism, and these major companies that should have been broken up by actually being anti-monopoly, anti-trust, okay? Trust busters, okay? They don't exist anymore. So you've got these mega corporations buying up properties, buying up all these things that are saying, no, no, no. When in reality, the government could right now literally make it so that none of this was an issue. And if, for example, it was a concern that we, the people, are paying too much for gas, if they're not worried about the environment, they're just going to make sure we got plenty for gas and stuff. There's literally nothing preventing the federal government from subsidizing we, the people, on fuel versus the oil companies for fuel. Okay, there's nothing preventing it to go the other way. And I'm not advocating that. I'm advocating for green energy. I'm advocating for using only the amount of oil needed for lubricants and other things. I'm advocating for a total revisioning of what a sustainable world looks like. And understanding that the coal rolling F-150s with the gun rack in the back are going to hate it every step of the way. But unfortunately, somebody's got to sit down with them and explain to them, hey, dude, I get it, man. You want to go hunt deer? You want to go fishing? You want to roll your F-150 on its jacked up coal rolling, exhaust? I get it, man. It makes you feel like you're a man, makes up for some small areas between your legs. I get it. But with that in mind, the reality is this is what we need to do. unless we just are cool with perishing. And that goes back to our conversation about these Christian Zionists who are looking for end times and aren't worried about blowing up the world because they see that just they're accelerationists of a different flavor.
Indeed. We'll continue.
Just a couple of years before the crisis, US policymakers had been focused on an entirely different problem, one that would change America forever. In this period, the US economy had been growing at insane rates, and all of this time the currency had been pegged to gold, but now the supply of gold was being outpaced by the rest of the economy, which was inflating more and more every single day. The gold standard at least gave the dollar some legitimacy, but eventually the gold standard was to become almost obsolete.
Time out. So let me explain this to you. Back when a country is just getting started, or when an empire conquers a territory, using gold as a means of saying, hey, the paper's good, I promise, you can convert it to this thing, is kind of like a gamble to get adoption. Hyman Minsky has always said, I mean, he's dead now, but written many, many times, anybody can create a currency. The issue is getting accepted, right? And so when you're trying to get something accepted, having it pegged to gold when you're a rookie, when you're a little teeny nobody, when you're trying desperately to create you could start with this. But once you have the apparatus in place to enforce attacks, like I said previously, a gold standard literally holds you to digging up gold or going and conquering another country to get more gold for your war chest, if this is the way you want to do it. There's literally no point in the world whatsoever. We've never really been on a true gold standard anyway. It's always been extraordinarily arbitrary, always. Okay. And so the idea of this is what gives it legitimacy is moron talk, because ultimately, what do you do when you have a gold standard? You make sure that the people that really have money, and the people that don't are really poor. You don't have to go far back to the Great Depression in the 1920s and 1930s. I mean, you don't have to look far. You can see these things. This right here is a libertarian fetish. And actually, sadly, I've seen socialists who don't understand Marx and have never been scientific in their socialism, so they never bothered learning what fiat was because, well, why be scientific? Marx said to be scientific. Wait, hold on, scientific and utopian? So why is it that we aren't scientific in understanding systems? When things change, when the material conditions change, if you've learned dialectical materialism, if you learned historical materialism and understand these things, you would immediately understand that things have fucking changed. And you would understand how the system works, and more importantly, how it could work in the hands of a dictatorship of the proletariat, if that was your desire. Right. Instead, we don't understand these things. And so we superimpose ignorance like a gold standard, which is just the stupidest thing ever, beyond dumb. What they're doing is they're banking on the collapse of your country because they want to have gold for when they go to the other country so they can get the other currency. Because let's be fair, Elon Musk isn't taking gold bullion, he's taking US dollars. Bill Gates, when he gets his subsidies, isn't taking gold, he's loving every US dollar he gets. The same thing with Virgin and all the rest of these rich people. The Adelsons, they love US dollars. This is not, they are not the ones belly aching about this. It's people that don't know any better, that just say things, that they have things to say and their mouths do this, but their brains are shut off. Gold standard is no standard to live by. And literally, if you understand that money came out of credit relations, not barter, okay, if you understand that money started with credit relations, then you understand that all money is a form of credit. I have mine, now I'm giving it to you. You and then turn and use it to settle another debt. There's nothing more than that. And as long as it is able to pay taxes, it will retain whatever value it has. You pay $1 in tax, you get $1. That's it. That's the relationship. And so when you understand that and you say, well, where's all this inflation coming from? Do some homework. I challenge you to do some homework. What do I want us to do? Well, what I want us to do is organize outside of the electoral process And I want us to build dual power. I want us to build mutual aid. I want us to build legal aid. I want us to ensure people that don't have homes have homes. Because what happens when you are just a union person and the union decides to call a strike? What happens? The strike fund may pay you $200 a week, but you're over there flipping dough at Domino's Pizza trying to make ends meet. And all of a sudden, if you didn't stash a war chest of $20,000, God help you, to survive the strike, you're going to have to do something. And that's when you start seeing people cross the strike. You've got to earn a general strike. You've got to earn these things. And to earn them, it requires organization. And people hate organizing. They want to be a big fish in a small pond. They want to be the master of their own destiny. They don't want to work together. But that's what I want. What I want is that. But what I'm trying to do by explaining economics is to show you that you are wasting your fucking time with elections. You're wasting your fucking time trying to hope that you can gamble it correctly. We must organize together. And quite frankly, that means taking on an unjust government. And that means something very scary. But in reality, that's what I want. It's not what I want. Actually, it's not what I want. It is what is to be done, to quote my guy Lenin. Okay. It really is what is to be done, is the answer to the question, what is to be done? And if you could work with capitalists to get everything you wanted, if you could work within this system, it wouldn't work because this system needs poor people. It needs people at the bottom to do the bottom jobs. And no amount of automation is going to take care of all of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is where the whole immigration issue is going to come to a head, where people are going to realize that, hey, you may have an issue with illegal immigrants, but the bigger issue isn't the illegal immigrant. It's the person hiring the illegal immigrant. You know, when I see the people out there saying, oh, we can't run our operation with illegal immigrants, it's because you don't want to pay a living wage. That's the only reason.
What if we had a federal job guarantee? Now, mind you, we're not going to get that with this government. Let me be crystal clear. No. This would violate this. The business community needs us laid off, to be poor, to be desperate, to take whatever they give us, to not be strong and powerful and organized, to demand higher wages and better conditions, right? So what they will do is they would literally fight against the job guarantee. But if you had a federal job guarantee, and if you were to eliminate some of these industries that are causing the planet to burn up and create what we call a just transition and pay those people salaries and also train them into new industry that would handle renewable energy or providing healthcare versus the healthcare denial service, right? You literally could do this stuff. You could literally fund every one of these paychecks. We could have nationalized payroll during COVID and you wouldn't have heard a peep from anybody. Oh, they shut us down. We're losing money. No, we could have literally, and we did shows on that. We had Pavlina Chernova come in and talk about, if you really want this to work for everyone, nationalize fucking payroll. Make these folks whole so it doesn't matter, so we can do the right thing without hurting each other. No, I'm not going to debate the COVID thing.
But unfortunately, the entire system would collapse on itself, because then people would see it for what it really is. The entire the entire veil will be removed. Again, I believe in the free market, but I believe in a real free market. What we have, this is not a free market, which is why I've always said capitalism cannot survive without socialism. Period. Any other way is just kidding yourself, because in the end, the only people who defend it, as I said, are the ones who are not just benefiting from the system, but immensely benefiting from it. And the same is true with the state of Israel. It's the same thing. Let's finish this up.
And so the US needed a new system, one that could benefit a handful of people. So Kissinger devised a plan to secure America's economic dominance without the gold standard, whilst also enriching his friends in the finance industry and putting them in a dominant position over US politics. So remember the war we mentioned earlier, the one that caused this whole oil crisis to begin with? Well, Kissinger was instrumental in causing this exact war. If the balance in the everlasting Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia ever shifts too drastically, then that could upset their oil monopoly and the whole petrodollar system. It's led America to be an interventionist state, spending its population's money on unwinnable wars and propping up corrupt and ineffective regimes, only to fall apart the second America takes its troops out. It's all the more tragic when you begin to think about what could have happened instead. If Nixon's nuclear plan had been put into practice, the US would have built hundreds of power plants. They would have satisfied its energy need decades ago, and it would still be enough energy production even today. With all of that nuclear energy, the US wouldn't have been able to maintain the oil-based monopoly it refuses to give up.
Mixed bag, but I think Moon makes some pretty salient points, especially about nuclear energy. But unfortunately, and we run into this problem often, as you like to point out, when it comes to the issue of the monetary system and how it really works, you have people that speak when they shouldn't speak.
Yes.
And it ends up hurting the cause. That is what I would say to Moon, because I think Moon does do some pretty solid content. But if the argument you're making is an argument that is not accurate, you end up hurting the good points about what you're fighting for, and people are just going to ignore that. And they're just going to see it as, well, we can't do that or this, whatever, because you're saying that we should still be on the gold standard or the petrodollar. And all the while, we're being hoodwinked by a government that doesn't think its people will ever rebel against them.